get a chance to do sound tests because I was like, you know what? I'm here. I'm going to jump in. I got to talk about this case because it's been on my mind and I wanted to talk about it. All right. So let me start where I was at. First off, hello, everyone. And thank you guys for joining us. All right. Secondly, I want to remind you guys, don't read too much into this being 11-1 on one count because the jury was under the instructions to begin deliberate, that they could only deliberate one count at a time. So, thank you guys. Thank you, buddy. He's in this stage where he wants to tell on himself and everything's an accident. And he's like, I went over and I touched this. And I'm like, it's okay, son. You're good. And you're probably going to maybe hear him in the background because once he knows I'm live, he likes to be heard. But the judge laid out for the jury, if you remember, they deliberate each charge separately. So what that means is they have not started on 2, 3, and 4. They started on 1. So the 11-1 could very well be not guilty, and it could be guilty. I think it's very difficult to tell which side they're on in this instance because you could have somebody very passionate on either side. Now, my perspective on this case is I think when you listen to the defense's closing argument and you contrast it with the state's closing argument and you look at the arguments being made in this case, self-defense cases are cases that a lot of jurors, these are the ones that jurors acquit on. And I think in this case, to me, what stands out for me is this. A lot, if you go into the comments, and I've been through my comment section quite a bit, I've tried to respond to some of them. A lot of people get hung up on, hey, he returned, he came back. But that's not what the defense said, and that's not what he testified to. What you have is a situation where a young man, shows up with his friends. And what we're to believe is again, it's really unbelievable to me, but we're to believe that this young man becomes enraged because his friend's car gets beaten up. And that the very friend whose car gets destroyed by this angry mob of teenagers, which is not hard to believe because that's how that's how this happens when they get together, that suddenly this young man says, I'm going to go stab people to death, right? I'm just going to go on a rage and just start stabbing random people. That's clearly not what was happening here. And anyone reading it that way is just ignoring, in my opinion, reason and logic, because what we clearly know happened here. And if you, and maybe being a father of 4 boys, 2 of which are in the teenage years, and one of which I've had to experience nothing like this, but I've experienced this lack of logic and this desire to be a man and support your friends. And, I got to stand up for my friends. That all overrides. And for them, and this is where I was at, where I said to me that, and maybe the defense attorney didn't feel there was enough value in doing this. But one thing that I know there's been a wealth of studies done on, it's number one is how, due to the lack of development in the frontal cortex of the brain, mobs of teenagers come together and they can make horrible decisions and they become murderers. They can become killers in a mob setting. And it accelerates fast. And that's what happened in this case. They all pile out of the house. They're destroying this car. And it's not until that knife comes out that breaks that mob of that. What we needed was you can't invade the province of the jury's decision-making. What you can do is you can educate the jury. And I put out a piece and a document out earlier in the trial explaining the law in Connecticut that allows. And there were 3 experts that they could have used to talk about this. Secondarily, the idea of self-defense, which you have to understand, is in the eye of the individual. It's not in your eyes. It's in his defense did a good job of reminding us. It's in the eye of the individual at that moment. So it's not as easy to believe. There was a football player down in Florida who shot people who came to his house, and that jury acquitted him of self-defense because it was argued to the jury, and it's very true. This is how it's viewed through that person. And in the eyes of a 16-year-old kid, self-defense is he's got an attack on his mind. In his mind, he was being invited to this property. He was being called upon. In fact, what he was being done is he was having his manhood challenged if he didn't show up. And they were going back and forth. And it wasn't just him. It was him and a group of his friends that were accelerating each other. And then there was another group of friends that were over here accelerating each other. And they were all accelerating the situation. So this idea that you're going to say that he's the aggressor and he was not the aggressor. They were all the aggressors. So thereby, you can't put him as just the aggressor. It was both groups were equally doing this. And as a result, when he arrives, he goes down there and they get attacked by this group of kids. Now, of course, the idea here is well, anybody that's older and wiser and their brains better developed would drive the hell away and call the police. In that age group with those people, they can't do that. It's like the brain would block them from doing that because it would be looked at as a sign of weakness. And those very kids that are claiming how afraid they were, and you could never have thought of this. Who would have thought that you would have, I believe that was Tyler Rich said back to the fencer. Who would have thought that somebody would run? Well, who would have thought that a gang of 30 kids is going to go out on a car, break a windshield, bust off a bumper, and spray somebody down with WD-40? Who would have thought that, Mr. Rich? Well, that's exactly what you guys were doing. And you guys could have all gone in a house, locked the door, and if these guys would have invaded the province of your house, if they would have tried to bash down the doors, they would have tried to come in, you would have absolutely been in your well rights to defend yourself. But you came out with a group of violence-hungry kids who were ready to watch fights, who were ready to record fights, who were ready to accelerate this thing. And out they come. And they do that. They attack that car. Anybody that says that they didn't retreat, not only that, to me, they go down the street. Now, I understand exactly. I can see exactly. I can see one of my sons would be the guy that would be dumb enough, like DaSilva and probably Valle, who is a very popular guy, knows all these people, and would think, I'm going to walk down there, right back into the lion's den, and I'm going to try to talk to these guys. And this is why it would have been important to have a psychologist who talks about the psychology of a 16-year-old, not talking about their independent thoughts or decision-making, but the overall understanding of it and how stupid it is. And his attorney did a great job. It said, man, there was a lot of stupid going on that night. Oh, thank you, Bodie. Man, there was a lot of stupid going on that night. Because there was. But that's how 16-year-olds are. I remember my company I worked for, CEO, my company, we were at a meeting. We were at a meeting for managers, and he was talking about his sons and his kids. And he said, man, when they get to be about 15, 16 years old, man, they're stupid. Man, they don't make good decisions. And that's exactly right. That's what we saw in this case. It was a whole group of bad decisions, and a whole group of bad decisions encouraging more bad decisions. So here we go, right? He goes back down there. Now, what happens? There's one guy in the car who flips him the knife, right? Now, this is where I really am bothered, because this is where the prosecution literally, you could say, in my opinion, is twisting, turning facts that they know not to be true. And that is this. And they literally used immunity agreements and the threat of prosecution to drive a theory that allows them to get to the big M. I can't say it on YouTube. I slip it out sometimes. And this is the fact that they say the return to the car to allegedly get a knife. Well, it's pretty clear that didn't happen. He was given the knife and flipped it from Jack, right? And he goes down there because they think they're going to go down there and talk to these people. And what happens? They get converged upon by an angry mob. So from his perspective at that point, he is watching his friend. I mean, one thing that I think, to me, there was one person that should have had a doctor. The defense should have been able to call a doctor in there. And you know who it was? It was to talk about Tyler DaSilva's injuries. Because the whole choice for Valle to act was based on Tyler DaSilva's injuries and what he said he injured. Concussion, contusions. He was in the hospital yesterday. Or not yesterday, but the next day. And that's significant because he was getting beaten severely. He was bloody. There was one of the witnesses said he was bloody. He was unconscious. This angry mob of kids, again, this is where it's like, what would they have been willing to do? They would have been willing to kill. Why? Because we know it's happened. And there's wealth of studies. There's wealth of times that mobs have acted, angry mobs of teenagers have acted and done things, heinous things, killed people, beaten people down. And these are kids that independently would have never done it. But when it came together, they can't even explain why they did it. It just accelerated one on top of the other. The only reason why that stopped, the only reason why that did not happen, the only reason why we're not here at the trial of the brutal beatdown of a young man named Tyler DaSilva, who died and was beaten unconscious and then died days later, and now all those kids are on trial, is because the knife came out. And that is the truth. And Valle, I believe, returned to the car, saw he wasn't in there, and I believe that story. I think it makes perfect sense. What doesn't make any sense is he's going to run to the car and grab a knife he doesn't even know is there. He had no idea that knife was there. He had no idea where that knife was. He had no idea what was going on. It doesn't make any sense. You know? And to me, this is where I think the attorney's going to look at it and say, well, we don't have to prove anything. We don't have a burden. And then you're getting into a burden. And then you're inviting the prosecution to call witnesses. And, it does open up a rabbit hole. But I think it would have been important context for the jury to understand back there thinking about this in their correct and proper context. And then fully understanding, because, again, it hammers home the idea that this is not a decision that you make based on your own. Now, you bring your own life experiences into it. But this is not about your perspective or what you think. This is about what Raul Valle believed in that moment, at that time, facing down 30 to 40 angry teenagers, watching them beat his friend. He's getting beat. He's on the ground, and he's making decisions. And to me, this is not some targeted knife attack. It really isn't. I mean, this doesn't even make any sense with the amount of people. And Jimmy McGrath, we can't say for certain what he was doing. Everyone has said now, of course, and this is the thing where when someone passes away, they become angels. And I understand that. I'm not taking away from it. It's a very tragic situation. But we also have to acknowledge the fact that there is this tendency that when somebody passes away, when someone dies, that all of a sudden they do no wrong. All of a sudden, everything they've ever done in life is great. And in this case, nobody saw him attacking. Nobody saw him involved. Yet, we know he was interested. He was asking what was going on, and he was there. And you can't rule out beyond a reasonable doubt that he wasn't involved because we don't have the footage. Now, here's the other question. Where is the footage that we know exists based on the testimony that was put in court, where there was close-up footage that never made its way into the police hands that could have answered all of those questions? And that's something that I think the defense attorney should have also arranged, because that's a big reasonable doubt that says, where is it? Why wasn't it produced? Why was the only footage produced for the jury or to the police footage that was either incriminated Valle or wasn't enough to incriminate anyone else, and left enough room that they could explain whatever they wanted to put in there, and it didn't show any key moments? So that's where I fall on this case. I think this young man should be acquitted. I think it's a tough one for jurors to acquit sometimes in cases like this, when there's young people who've died and there's other people that have stabbed, and there's a community that they have to go back and face. So it's a tough one. Now, my hope is that if this is 11-1 guilty, we have the one holdout, and they get a chance to go do this all over again, and hopefully maybe they get a chance to come back and take another bite at the apple and do a different presentation. So let's go in here now. I apologize. I wanted to